Put your hands where I can see them." The command cut through the humid evening air like a blade, sharp, rehearsed, final, and for a second the entire street seemed to hold its breath, as if the asphalt itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. The faint hum of distant traffic blending with the ticking engine of a parked sedan, where Alicia Brooks sat still, her fingers slightly trembling but raised exactly as instructed, palms open, empty, visible under the flickering glow of a streetlight that buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive. The dashboard clock read 9:17 p.m., the end of a 12-hour shift at St. Mary's Medical Center, her scrub still faintly carrying the scent of antiseptic and peppermint lotion she used on her patients, her phone resting in the cup holder with a half-written message to a worried mother asking if her son had made it through the night. Alicia's voice still echoing in that message, calm, steady, reassuring. Though now she said nothing at all, her eyes fixed forward, listening, waiting, doing everything right, because she had learned long ago that sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough. Outside the car, Officer Daniel Reeves stood rigid, one hand near his chest, the other hovering in a posture that suggested control more than uncertainty, his boots planted wide on the cracked pavement, his silhouette outlined by the alternating red and blue reflections washing across nearby storefront windows, each pulse of light turning the quiet street into a stuttering sequence of color and shadow, as if reality itself couldn't decide how to frame what was happening. Somewhere behind him, a second patrol car idled, its headlights casting a long beam that stretched across Alicia's windshield and illuminated the faint outline of her ID badge hanging from her rearview mirror, the word nurse barely visible beneath the glare. A voice from a nearby porch whispered, low and cautious, "She's not even moving," and the words seemed to drift into the night without landing anywhere, unnoticed by the man in uniform whose breathing had grown louder, sharper, as though the situation existed only within the narrow tunnel of his perception. Alicia swallowed once, slow, deliberate, her shoulders relaxed despite the tension coiling through her chest, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost fragile against the weight of the moment. "I'm not a threat, sir." Each word measured, careful, chosen not to challenge but to clarify, not to resist but to reassure. The kind of tone she used with frightened patients who needed to believe that someone was in control, that everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, stretching across seconds that felt longer than miles, broken only by the faint buzz of a neon sign down the block and the distant bark of a dog that didn't understand why the night had suddenly changed. A phone somewhere began recording, its small red light blinking like a heartbeat, capturing fragments of a moment no one fully understood yet. A moment suspended between perception and consequence, between assumption and truth, and in that fragile space Alicia remained exactly as she was, hands raised, eyes forward, stillness held like a promise, while the world around her watched, waited, and quietly shifted into something it could never fully return from. The red and blue lights kept cycling, washing over Alicia's face in steady pulses that felt almost rhythmic, almost unreal, like the slow blink of something mechanical trying to understand a human moment. And somewhere in that repetition her mind drifted not away from the present, but deeper into it, anchoring itself in small details the way she had learned to do during long nights in the hospital. Focusing on what she could control, her breathing measured in quiet counts, one inhale, one exhale. Steady as a monitor line, she had watched 1,000 times before, because panic never helped anyone, not the patients she stayed beside when families had already gone home, and not herself now. The faint crease in her left sleeve where she had rolled it earlier to adjust in 4, the soft pressure of the seatbelt across her chest, the distant glow of a gas station sign 2 blocks down flickering between letters as if struggling to stay lit. All of it grounded her, all of it. Reminded her that this was still the same world she had moved through just minutes ago, a world where she had been someone trusted, someone steady, someone who stayed when others could not. Her phone screen dimmed and lit again with a notification she did not dare reach for. The message preview barely visible, but familiar enough that she could almost hear the voice behind it. A mother's voice from earlier that evening asking if her son had been afraid, asking if he had been alone, and Alicia had answered without hesitation then, He was not alone, because she had sat beside him, because she had held that space where fear could not take over completely. And now that same certainty felt distant, not gone, but tested in a way she had never prepared for. Outside, Officer Reeves shifted his weight slightly, the gravel under his boots making a faint crunch that seemed louder than it should have been, his posture still rigid, still locked into something that looked like procedure but felt heavier, less flexible, like a script he could not step away from even if he wanted to. His gaze fixed on Alicia as though waiting for something to change, something to confirm what he had already decided. And that was the part she could not see, the part no one could see, the silent conclusion forming behind his eyes. A car passed slowly at the end of the block, its headlights sweeping across the scene for a brief second before continuing on, the driver not stopping, not intervening, just witnessing in that distant, detached way people do when they are unsure whether a moment belongs to them or not. And the street fell quiet again, quieter than before, as if even the city itself had stepped back. Alicia's fingers twitched once, barely noticeable, not a movement of intent but of tension releasing in the smallest way, and she caught it immediately, steadied herself again, her voice still calm when she spoke once more, softer now, almost like she was speaking to a patient who needed reassurance more than instruction. I am just heading home. The words simple, ordinary, the kind of sentence that should have ended the moment rather than stretched it, and for a fraction of a second, something shifted in the air, not visible, not defined, but present, like the pause before a decision is made, like the quiet space where everything could still turn one way or another. Somewhere behind the second patrol car, a neighbor had stepped closer to the edge of their driveway, arms folded tightly, watching without speaking, their face caught in the alternating lights, concern written in the way their posture leaned forward just slightly, as if wanting to say something but not knowing what would be heard or how it would be received. And the camera from earlier kept recording, its small lens pointed steadily, capturing not just the scene but the stillness inside it, the fragile balance of control and fear, of authority and humanity, all of it suspended in a moment that refused to resolve, a moment where Alicia Brooks remained exactly as she had been from the start, composed, compliant, present, holding on to her calm not because she felt safe, but because it was the only thing she had left to give. The moment did not explode. It folded in on itself, quiet and irreversible, like a door closing without a sound. And for a brief second after it happened, the world did not react. It hesitated, as if unsure how to process what it had just witnessed, the red and blue lights still flashing, still indifferent, casting their rhythm across Alicia's unmoving car, across Officer Reeves standing exactly where he had been, his posture frozen now in a way that no longer looked like control but something else entirely, something hollow. The phone recording from across the street captured everything except meaning, the frame shaking slightly as the person holding it whispered, "Oh my God," over and over again, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to fill the silence that had replaced everything else. The neighbor on the driveway took a step forward and then stopped, their hands rising halfway, as if to reach out, and then falling again, unsure of what could be done or what should be said. Because there are moments where language feels too small, and this was one of them. Alicia's phone screen lit up again inside the car, the message still unread, the same mother waiting for an answer that would not come, the small digital glow reflecting faintly against the inside of the windshield, a quiet reminder of a life that had been moving forward just minutes before, a life made of small acts of care that no one on this street fully knew. Officer Reeves exhaled slowly, a breath he seemed to have been holding for longer than he realized, his shoulders lowering slightly, but the tension did not leave him. It shifted, settling into something heavier, something that did not belong to procedure or training, something that did not have a clear instruction manual. And for the first time since the stop began, his eyes moved away from Alicia and toward the ground, as if searching for something to anchor himself to, something solid in a moment that had become uncertain. The second patrol car door opened, and another officer stepped out, slower, more cautious, taking in the scene not as it had been but as it now was, their gaze moving from Reeves to the car to the bystanders, piecing together fragments that did not yet form a complete picture, their voice low when they finally spoke, asking a question that did not expect an immediate answer. The street, once just another stretch of pavement in a quiet neighborhood, had changed without physically changing at all. Every house still standing, every light still on, but the air carrying a weight that had not been there before. A weight that pressed down on everyone present in different ways, some with confusion, some with fear, some with a growing realization that what had happened would not stay contained within these few square yards of asphalt. Somewhere in the distance, a siren began to rise, faint at first, and then clearer, approaching not with urgency, but with inevitability, the sound stretching through the night like a thread connecting this moment to everything that would follow, because moments like this do not end when they happen. They echo, they travel, they reach people who were not there, who will still feel their impact in ways they cannot yet predict. And inside the car, where everything had started with a simple instruction and a calm response, Alicia Brooks remained exactly as she had been. Her presence now held not in movement or voice, but in the quiet space she left behind, a space that would not stay empty for long, because the world has a way of filling silence with questions and questions with truth, whether anyone is ready for it or not. The sirens arrived not with chaos, but with order, low and steady, a controlled sound that slid into the scene like something rehearsed, something practiced, and within minutes the quiet street was no longer quiet at all. It was structured, measured, filled with movement that followed invisible lines of protocol. Paramedics stepping quickly, but not rushing, voices speaking in calm tones that carried weight without volume. Neighbors pulling back just enough to make space, but not enough to stop. Watching, because once something like this happens, people do not leave. They stay, they witness, they remember. The glow from the ambulance lights replaced the earlier flashes, softer in color but heavier in meaning, casting long reflections across the windshield where Alicia's phone still rested, its screen now dark, its unanswered message sitting quietly in digital stillness, waiting in a world that had already moved past the moment it was sent. A paramedic paused near the driver's side door, glancing in for just a second longer than necessary, not out of confusion but recognition, the kind that comes when you realize the person in front of you is not just part of a situation, but someone who has stood where you stand, someone who has done the same work, carried the same weight. And for a brief moment, that recognition passed silently between them, even if it could not change anything. Officer Reeves stepped back as others moved forward, his role in the center of the scene dissolving into the background, his hands no longer raised in command but hanging at his sides, uncertain, the tension that had once defined his stance now replaced by something quieter, something that did not show on training manuals or in briefings, a stillness that suggested he was beginning to understand that this moment would not stay contained, that it would move beyond this street, beyond this night, into places where explanations are not enough. The second officer spoke into a radio, voice low, controlled, relaying information that sounded clinical, detached, as if putting distance between what had happened and the words used to describe it. Because sometimes language is the only barrier people have between themselves and the full weight of reality. A small group had gathered now at the edge of the sidewalk, not close enough to interfere, but not far enough to disengage. Their faces lit by alternating light, expressions shifting between disbelief and quiet anger. Though no one raised their voice, no one stepped forward, the tension expressed instead in the way arms folded tighter, in the way heads shook slowly, in the way eyes refused to look away. Somewhere in the crowd, the person who had been recording lowered their phone slightly, not stopping the video but no longer holding it steady, the image tilting just enough to capture more sky than street, as if the act of witnessing had become too heavy to frame directly. The distant siren that had approached earlier faded into silence now that it had arrived, replaced by the hum of engines and the soft murmur of coordinated response. And above it all the night continued, as if unaware, a plane passing overhead, its faint blinking light crossing the dark sky, moving from one horizon to another without pause, without interruption. A reminder that the world beyond this moment had not stopped even though everything here felt suspended. And standing just outside the circle of activity, Officer Reeves remained still, his gaze fixed somewhere ahead but not focused, as if replaying something internally that no one else could see. The sequence of events reduced now to fragments that no longer aligned the way they had seconds before, Because once a moment passes, it changes shape. It reveals edges that were not visible before, and those edges do not disappear. They stay, they press. They demand to be understood, whether he was ready or not. By the time the last emergency vehicle pulled away, the street no longer felt like a place where something had just happened. It felt like a place where something had been left behind, something invisible but impossible to ignore, and the silence that settled in afterward carried more weight than the noise that had filled it before. Yellow tape stretched across a portion of the road, fluttering slightly in the late-night breeze, not dramatic, not loud, just present, marking a boundary that everyone understood without needing it explained, a quiet line between before and after. Neighbors lingered longer than usual, some standing on porches. Others gathered in small clusters on sidewalks, their conversations hushed, fragmented, repeating the same questions in different forms as if changing the words might produce a different answer, but it never did. One person mentioned the video. Another said it was already being shared. Another shook their head slowly and looked down at their phone, the glow from the screen reflecting in their eyes as they watched something they wished they had not seen. Inside one of the nearby houses, a television flickered to life, the volume low at first, then raised just enough to hear a breaking news alert, the anchor's voice steady, composed, using language that sounded careful, measured, selecting words that carried information without emotion. But even through that controlled tone, something underneath it felt different, like the story had already begun to move beyond this street, beyond this neighborhood, into something larger, something that would not be easily contained. Officer Reeves sat alone now in his patrol car, the engine off, the interior dim except for the faint glow of the dashboard, his hands resting on the steering wheel without gripping it. His posture no longer rigid but not relaxed either, suspended somewhere in between, as if his body had not yet decided how to exist in the aftermath of what had unfolded. He stared forward, not at anything specific, just through the windshield where the reflections of earlier lights had faded, leaving only the quiet outline of the empty street ahead. His radio crackled once, then went silent again. A voice somewhere asking for confirmation, for details, for clarity, and he did not respond immediately, not because he did not hear it, but because the words required did not come as easily as they had before. The script he had followed earlier no longer fitting the shape of the moment. Across town, inside a modest apartment where the lights had been left on longer than usual, a phone began to ring, then stopped, then rang again, persistent, unanswered, the same number calling back to back as if refusing to accept silence as an answer, and on the small kitchen table beside it sat a framed photo of Alicia Brooks in her scrubs, smiling softly, the kind of smile that came from someone who spent more time giving than taking, someone who understood the quiet value of staying present in moments others could not handle. Back on the street, the person who had been recording finally lowered their phone completely, their hands shaking slightly as they exhaled, the weight of what they had captured settling in not as shock, but as responsibility, because recording a moment like that does not end when you press stop. It follows you. It stays with you. It asks you what comes next, and somewhere in the distance, beyond the neighborhood, beyond the quiet houses and dim streetlights, the story had already begun to travel, moving through screens, through conversations, through people who had never been there, but would soon feel like they had been, because moments like this do not remain local. They expand, they reach outward, and when they do, they carry more than just facts. They carry the question of what happens next, and whether the silence left behind will be filled with truth or left to echo unanswered. The night did not end when the lights disappeared. It stretched into the early hours of morning in a way that felt slower than usual, heavier, as if time itself had decided to move with caution, and by sunrise the quiet neighborhood had already changed in ways that could not be reversed, front doors opening earlier than normal, curtains shifting just enough for people to look out without being seen, the street still marked, still holding onto the memory of what had happened as if it had settled into the pavement. Inside his patrol car, now parked behind the station, Officer Reeves sat with the engine off again, the same posture, the same stillness, but the silence around him felt different here, more enclosed, more personal, as if the walls of the vehicle were pressing inward, holding him in a space where there were no outside distractions left to lean on. Only the replay of a moment that refused to stay in the past, his body camera resting on the seat beside him, powered down but not forgotten, a small object carrying a weight far beyond its size. The station itself moved like it always did. Officers walking in and out, conversations happening in low tones, paperwork being processed, the normal rhythm of routine trying to continue even as something beneath it had shifted, because routine does not stop for discomfort. It moves forward, whether people are ready or not. A supervisor passed by Reeves's vehicle and paused briefly, not knocking, not speaking, just looking through the window for a second longer than necessary before continuing on. The kind of glance that carried awareness without confrontation, acknowledgement without resolution. Across the city, Alicia's name had begun to appear in places she had never expected, on screens, in headlines, in conversations between people who had never met her but now spoke as if they needed to understand her, as if knowing who she was might somehow make sense of what had happened. Her photo from the hospital badge shared and reshared, the same soft expression, the same calm presence that had defined her life, now becoming a symbol of something much larger than any single moment. Inside that modest apartment where her phone still rested on the kitchen table, the unanswered calls had finally stopped, replaced by messages, dozens of them, each one carrying a different tone, confusion, concern, disbelief, and the television remained on, the volume slightly higher now, repeating the same story with new details layered in, each update bringing more attention, more questions, more people into a moment that had started on a quiet street just hours before. The person who had recorded the video sat alone now, watching it again, not out of curiosity but out of necessity, as if replaying it might reveal something missed, something that could change the outcome. But it never did. The image remained the same, the sequence unchanged, and with each viewing the weight of it grew heavier, not lighter, because understanding does not always bring relief. Sometimes it only brings clarity. And somewhere beyond the noise of media, beyond the hum of the station, beyond the quiet tension settling into the neighborhood, something else had begun to form, not loud, not visible yet, but present, like a shift in pressure before a storm. A gathering of people who had not been there that night, but would soon step into the story, not driven by anger alone, but by something steadier, something rooted in memory and connection, because Alicia Brooks had not lived her life in isolation, and the impact she left behind was not limited to a single place. It stretched farther than anyone on that street could have imagined. And by the time the sun rose fully over the city, casting a pale light across rooftops and empty roads, the question was no longer what had happened, but what would come next, and who would step forward to answer it. The first sign did not come from the news or the station or the growing noise across the city. It came quietly, almost too quietly to notice at first. A black SUV rolling down the street outside Officer Reeves's house just after sunrise, its engine low, controlled, the kind of vehicle that did not draw attention unless you already understood what it meant, and it did not stop right away. It passed once, then again, as if confirming location, as if aligning something unseen before finally pulling to a slow halt along the curb. Reeves had not slept, the night still sitting behind his eyes as he stood near his kitchen window, a cup of coffee untouched in his hand, watching without fully understanding why his attention locked onto that vehicle, why something in his chest tightened in a way that felt different from everything before, not fear exactly, but recognition of something approaching that could not be handled the way everything else had been handled. The door of the SUV opened and a man stepped out, not hurried, not hesitant, his posture steady, composed, wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with a kind of discipline that did not come from ordinary routine. And he was not alone. Another vehicle turned the corner, then another, each one arriving without sirens, without lights, without urgency, just presence, deliberate and controlled. Within minutes, the street outside Reeves's home was no longer empty. It was occupied, not crowded, not chaotic, but filled with men who stood with a quiet precision, spacing themselves without needing instruction, their movements minimal, their focus clear, and there was something about the way they stood that shifted the atmosphere entirely, not aggressive, not confrontational, but undeniable, like a line drawn without being spoken. Reeves set his coffee down slowly, his hand no longer steady as he moved toward the front door, each step measured as if buying time, as if delaying the moment when he would have to face whatever this was. Because even before he opened the door, he understood this was not random. This was not coincidence. This was connected, and the connection ran deeper than he had prepared for. When he finally stepped outside, the morning air felt colder than it should have, sharper, carrying a silence that did not belong to early daylight. And standing at the center of the street, one man stepped forward, not closer than necessary, not invading space, but close enough to be heard without raising his voice. His eyes fixed on Reeves with a calm that did not need to prove anything. No one else spoke. No one else moved. The line behind him remained still, not like a threat, not like a show of force, but like a statement that had already been made before Reeves even stepped outside. The man's voice, when it came, was low, even, controlled in a way that suggested every word had already been chosen before he arrived. "Alicia Brooks," he said, not asking, not explaining, just placing the name in the space between them like something solid, something real that could not be ignored or dismissed. And for the first time since the night before, Reeves felt the moment shift completely out of his control, not because of volume, not because of anger, but because of certainty, a certainty carried by people who had not come to argue, not come to accuse, but come to stand in a truth that did not require permission to exist. And as the quiet line of men remained behind that single voice, the weight of what Alicia Brooks had meant to them, to someone among them, to more than one of them, began to settle into the space around Reeves in a way no report, no protocol, no explanation could ever contain. The name did not fade after it was spoken. It stayed there, suspended between them. And for a moment Officer Reeves did not respond, not because he did not hear it, but because the way it was said carried something different, something heavier than accusation, heavier than anger. It carried memory, and memory does not need to raise its voice to be heard. The man standing in front of him did not step closer, did not repeat himself. He simply held Reeves's gaze with a steadiness that felt unshakable. And behind him the others remained exactly where they were, not shifting, not reacting, their presence forming a quiet wall of discipline that said more in stillness than most people could in words. Reeves swallowed once, the dryness in his throat unexpected, his mind searching for something to say, something procedural, something structured, but nothing fit the shape of this moment, because there was no protocol for being confronted not by force, but by the weight of someone else's truth. The man finally spoke again, his tone unchanged. "She stayed with my brother," he said, simple, direct, each word landing with precision. 3 hours after the accident, when everyone else rotated out, when the shift ended, when it was not her responsibility anymore, she stayed. And there was no anger in his voice, no attempt to dramatize, just a statement that carried its own gravity. Because the meaning was already clear, Reeves felt something shift in his chest. Not sudden, not sharp, but steady, like a realization settling in piece by piece. And before he could respond, another man stepped forward from the line, not interrupting, just adding, "My daughter," he said quietly. She was afraid of hospitals, would not let anyone near her, except Alicia. And he paused, not for effect, but because the memory itself required a second to pass through him. She held her hand until she fell asleep. And again, no accusation followed, no demand, just truth placed into the space between them, one by one, not rushed, not coordinated by command, but by something deeper. Others spoke, each stepping forward just enough to be seen, each carrying a piece of Alicia Brooks that Reeves had never known, stories of small moments that did not make headlines, of nights that did not get recorded, of quiet decisions that no one else had noticed at the time but that had changed something for someone, somewhere. Reeves stood there, his hands at his sides, his posture no longer guarded, no longer prepared, but open in a way that felt unfamiliar, exposed not by threat, but by understanding, because what stood in front of him was not a group demanding justice in the way he had expected. It was a reflection of a life he had not taken the time to see, a life defined not by a single moment, but by countless others that had built something real, something lasting. The street remained quiet, no neighbors stepping out now, no cameras raised, just the soft morning light stretching across the pavement, illuminating the line of men and the single figure standing apart from them. And in that light, the contrast became clear, not between uniforms or roles, but between perspectives, between what had been assumed and what had been true all along. Reeves finally lowered his gaze for a second, not in defeat, not in surrender, but in recognition, the kind that does not come easily, the kind that cannot be undone once it arrives. And when he looked back up, the silence between them had changed, no longer waiting for explanation, no longer demanding response. It simply existed, holding everything that had been said and everything that no longer needed to be. No one moved to end it. And that was what made the moment settle so deeply. Not the words that had been spoken, but the absence of anything that tried to rush past them. The quiet line of men remaining exactly as they were, not advancing, not retreating, simply holding their place as if the space itself deserved to be honored. And in that stillness, Officer Reeves felt something unfamiliar take shape. Not a command, not a reaction, but a realization that did not come all at once. It arrived slowly, like light spreading across a room that had been dim for too long. He looked from one face to another, not searching for anger anymore, not expecting confrontation, but seeing something else instead, something steadier, something grounded in memory and respect. And it shifted the way he understood everything that had happened, not changing the past, but changing the weight of it, the meaning of it. The man who had first spoken took a small step back, not as a retreat, but as a closing gesture, as if the purpose of being there had already been fulfilled, and without another word he turned, the others following not in formation but in quiet agreement, their presence dissolving from the street as calmly as it had arrived, leaving behind no noise, no disruption. Only the echo of what had been said and what had been understood. Reeves remained where he stood, the front door still open behind him, the morning air moving gently through the space as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. The street returning to its ordinary appearance, but not its ordinary meaning. Because once a truth has been spoken, it does not disappear with the people who carry it. It stays, it settles, it becomes part of what comes next. Inside the house, the cup of coffee he had left on the counter had gone cold, untouched, a small detail that now felt symbolic of something larger. A moment that had passed without notice at the time, but now stood as a quiet marker of before and after. Across the city, Alicia Brooks's name continued to move through conversations, through screens, through lives she had touched in ways no single story could fully capture. And those stories did not need to be loud to matter. They carried themselves forward in the way people remembered her, in the way they spoke her name with a softness that did not fade. Back at the station, reports were being written, statements being reviewed, processes unfolding the way they always did, structured, methodical, attempting to organize something that did not fit neatly into forms or categories, because some moments resist being simplified. They remain complex, layered, human. Reeves stepped back inside slowly, closing the door behind him with a quiet click, the sound small but final, and for a long time he did not move. He simply stood there, his eyes lowering not out of avoidance but out of reflection, the kind that does not seek to escape but to understand, to sit with what is no longer distant or abstract but immediate and real. The house was silent around him, the kind of silence that does not press but holds. And in that silence there were no voices telling him what to say next, no instructions guiding his next step, only the memory of a name spoken with certainty, Alicia Brooks, and the weight of